Alright, so we are back here with the third type of question. X squared plus 5x minus 6 is equal to 0. And now when you reflect back on the first question that we ever asked, you could see that the last term is a negative, a constant term. And you can see here with this question that the last term is also a negative constant term. Now, we concluded here that our factors would have to be having different signs. So it seems like this is the tradition that when the constant term is negative, inside our bracket, when we factorize, we are going to have different signs, because a negative constant term suggests that we are going to have different signs within the bracket. And then, of course, what dictates which sign the biggest factor will have? It is this sign of the middle term. So the sign of the middle term here was actually negative, and therefore the biggest factor for 24, which is 6, all right, had the sign of the middle term. So the sign of the middle term now this time round will take on a positive sign. The sign of the middle term will basically dictate that the highest factor for the factors of 6, which when we multiply give us -6, and when we add give us +5, will have a positive sign, the highest factor. So what are the factors of 6? So we can write there's 3 and 2, there's 6 and 1, right? And that's about it. So we said that the highest factor will have a positive sign, which then means that the other factor will have a negative sign. But when we multiply these, they all give us -6, which one, when we add, will give us +5. +3 minus 2 will give us +1. So that's not that one. So this one is out. +6 minus 1 will give us +5. So that means we have +6 minus 1. Then, of course, the x squared will be made by multiplying x together, equal to 0. Then we apply what we know as the zero factor law. In other words, we take this factor equate to 0, take that factor equate to 0, and then we find each respective root. X is equal to -6, x is equal to 1, and that's about as much as we know. Okay, so this is turning out to be very interesting, all right, that we are actually finding that when we have our equation in standard form, if the last constant term has a negative sign, that implies that our factors within the bracket will have different signs. But then the highest factor from the factors that we choose, which basically satisfies this equation, will have a negative sign if the middle term is negative, but it will have a positive sign if the middle term is positive, okay, the highest factor. And then, of course, that means that the other factor will have the opposite sign, okay, and that always applies for when our constant is negative, and we can clearly see that our x squared term is positive and having a coefficient of +1.